Okay, so good morning. For today, we're going to discuss about trigonometric equations. But before we proceed with the solving part of trigonometric equations, let us first define trigonometric equations. Okay, so this time, let us first define trigonometric equations. So first, it is an equation involving one or more trigonometric ratios of unknown angles. So in short, instead of using the variables x and y, we use of course, our combination of the variables x and y and the use of the trigonometric functions. So trigonometric equation po yun. Trigonometric equations can be solved by combining algebraic and trigonometric techniques. Okay? So, um, since it's a trigonometric equation, medyo kakaiba siya dun sa ibang equation na sinosolve natin because we need to identify the values of the x or the values of the variable that will make that equation true. So, papasok dito yung mga iba't ibang angles, specifically yung special angles, that will definitely satisfy the given trigonometric equation. Okay, so let's start with our first example. So the question goes like this. Solve for all the solutions of 5 sine x minus square root of 3 equals 3 sine x. So the first thing that we need to do is to go back to our original equation. So, solve natin siya algebraically kung paano tayo mag-solve ng typical na equation. Okay? So, hindi to pwede pagsamahin, pero itong dalawang ito, pwede. So, lipat natin si 3 sin x ito sa kaliwa. So, from positive, magiging negative 3 sin x. And then, nilipat natin si negative square root of 3 doon sa kanan. Simplifying the left portion of this equation, we have 2 sin x equals square root of 3. But then, since hinahanap natin yung value ni x for sin x, kailangan natin tanggalin tong 2. So, we can do that by dividing both sides by 2. So, 2 sin x divided by 2 equals square root of 3 divided by 2. Kakancel natin yung 2. We have sin x is equal to square root of 3 over 2. Ngayon, we are asked to find for the value of x. Solve for all the solutions that will make this value of sin x equal to square root of 3 over 2. So, kung babalikan natin yung mga angles, ibig sabihin yan, we need to think of an angle, value of angle kasi itong tinutukoy ni x, that once we substitute to sin x, it will give us a value of square root of 3 over 2. Pagka ganito ang technique, una nyo po munang isipin special angles. Most of the time, ganun naman pagka trigonometric equation. Special angles, most of the time. Okay? So, kung babalikan natin ang special angles, ang value ng angle na mabibigay kay sine ng value na square root of 3 over 2, una, sine 60 degrees is equal to square root of 3 over 2. Sa functions of special angles, 60 degrees or pi over 6. Yan ay pag nirelate natin sa sine, square root of 3 over 2 yun. Pero sabi kasi solve for all the solutions, hindi lang si sine 60 ang magbibigay ng value kay sine ng value na square root of 3 over 2. Tatandaan natin that sine is also positive in quadrant 2. Kung tatandaan natin the add sugar to coffee. Add meaning all functions are positive in the quadrant 1. Sugar meaning sine and its reciprocal ay positive sa quadrant 2. Tangent and its reciprocal 2. Positive ang tangent and its reciprocal to quadrant 3. And then quadrant 4, coffee. Co means cosine. And its reciprocal positive sa quadrant 4. Yun yung shortcut nun. Add sugar to coffee. So, kung babalikan natin ang square root of 3 over 2, itong particular value na ito, si sine 120 ay equal din sa square root of 3 over 2. So, most likely, ito na yung value ng solutions natin for x kung quadrant sa first rotation pa lang yan. However, we are asked to solve for all the solutions, meaning sa lahat ng rotation. First rotation pa lang itong nahanap natin. From the boundary, ibig sabihin ng first rotation, from 0 to 360 degrees, ito yung mga angles na mabibigay sa atin ng value for sine na square root of 3 over 2. Pero sa second rotation, third rotation, at sa iba pang rotation, may mga angles doon na equal din sa square root of 3 over 2. Ibig sabihin may coterminal kay 60 at coterminal din kay 120. Unahin natin yung 60 degrees. This particular value of k is an integer which pertains to the rotation. Okay? So, pag gumalaw na yung angle from 60 degrees, sa ibang rotation kasi mayroon pang value na magbibigay din kay sine ng square root of 3 over 2. So, yung una natin ay x is equal to 60 degrees plus 360 degrees k. And then, x is equal to 120 degrees plus 360 degrees k, where k is an integer. Ang ibig sabihin nito, from 0, hindi lang kay 0 to 360 degrees, magkakaroon ng value na square root of 3 over 2 ang sine. Marami siyang coterminal. For example, if k will be equal to 1, 360 plus 60, 420 degrees. Pag si 420, sinubstitute natin kay sine, that is also equal to square root of 3 over 2. And 420 degrees is more than one rotation already. Correct? So, ibig sabihin, lahat ng solutions for this particular equation is x is equal to 60 degrees plus 360 degrees k for this angle na coterminal nito. Okay? And x is equal to 120 degrees plus 360 degrees k. This particular equation pertains to the angles coterminal to 120, and this one pertains to the angles coterminal to 60 degrees. Kasi we need to solve for all the solutions. So, hindi lang natin i-confine ang value ni x sa unang rotation. Sa iba't ibang rotation, ito po yung magiging sagot natin for the value of x for this equation. Okay, this time, let's have number 2. We need to solve for the value of the solutions of 2 sine squared a minus 3 sine a plus 1 equals 0, where a is from 0 degrees to 2 pi. Meaning to say, yung angle na hinahanap natin, angle for a, I should be within 0 degrees to 2 pi. Pag ginawa natin yung degree measure, that is from 0 degrees to 360 degrees. Because we all know that an angle can also be expressed as a radian measure, hindi lang lagi sa degrees. So dito, hanapin natin yung value ni A, angle yon. Yung hinahanap nating value ni A ay from 0 to 360 degrees. So kung iisipin nyo, yun ay for one rotation. Sa loob ng first rotation, from 0 to 360 degrees, alin doon ang mga values ng A, mga angles na makakasatisfy dito. Yun ang ibig sabihin nun. So, medyo mas madali ito ng konti kasi ang hinahanap lang natin ay mga values ng A, mga angles na pag sinubstitute natin for the variable A, this will satisfy the trigonometric equation. Let's start. So, kung titignan niyo po yung equation na to, 2 sine squared A minus 3 sine A plus 1, kamukha siya ng quadratic equation. ax squared plus bx plus c. Ang pinakaiba lang, yung variable na involved dito, instead of the variable x, variable y, we use the trigonometric functions. Okay? So, isipin nyo lang, 2x squared minus 3x plus 1 equals 0. Parang ganun lang din siya. Ngayon, we all know that one particular way to solve a quadratic equation, specifically the solutions of quadratic equation, is to use factoring method. Ngayon, i-apply natin dito. Pag pinactor natin ito, that is 2 sine A minus 1, quantity sine A minus 1 equals 0. Alam natin na ang next step sa pag-factor ng quadratic equation na ina-apply natin sa trigonometric equation is to set each factors to 0. What does it mean? Yung first factor, isa-set natin sa 0. That is 2 sine A minus 1 equals 0. We will also set the second factor to 0. So that is sine A minus 1 equals 0. For us to easily solve this particular equation, let's try to make a division. Hatiin natin. Ayan. Okay. So, nahin natin isolve ito. So, ang next natin gagawin dyan, since nakaset yan sa 0, pag sinolve natin yan, sa negative 1, nilipat mo sa kabila. So, from negative 1, that will become positive 1. But since we are asked to solve for the value of A in sine A, we will divide both sides by 2. That will become 2 sine A divided by 2 equals 1 divided by 2. Ika-cancel natin yung 2. Ang matitira ay sine A equals 1/2. So, ang sine A natin ay equal sa 1/2. Ngayon, kung iisipin nyo po, kung i-relate natin itong nakuha natin dito sa ating interval, na your A should be from 0 to 2 pi, or your A should be greater than or equal to 0 but less than or equal to 2 pi or 360 degrees, we need to think of an angle in this interval from 0 to 360 degrees or 0 to 2 pi na kapag sinubstitute natin dito sa A as the angle, it will give sine a value of 1/2. So, isip agad. Sa quadrant 1, from 0 to 90, ang pwedeng magbigay kay sine ng value na 1/2 ay sine pi over 6. Sine pi over 6 is sine 30. Ang technique lang doon, 180 divided by 6, that is 30. So, 1/2 yun. Pero, hindi natin sinasara yung sitwasyon na si sine 30 lang, pi over 6, si sine 30 lang ang mabibigay ng value kay sine ng 1/2. Hindi lang po si sine 30 ang mabibigay ng value kay sine na 1/2. Alam natin, tatandaan natin na ang sine ay positive din sa quadrant 2. So, we also have sine 5 pi over 6. That is 180 divided by 6, that's 30, times 5, that's 150. Si 150 ay, sine 150 degrees ay equal din sa 1/2. So, ito po yung dalawang particular angle sa mabibigay kay sine ng value na 1/2. So, yung unang portion ng equation, na-solve na natin. Correct? Yung unang portion ng equation, na-solve na natin. Ngayon, ang next naman natin kailangan pagtuunan ng pansin is yung second equation. Ito. O, lagyan natin ng division para masadali nating hindi malito. Lagyan natin ng division. Ayan, lagyan natin ng division. Ito. Okay. So, dito, sine A minus 1 equals 0. Pag sinolve natin ito, kagaya ng prosesong ginawa natin dito, lilipat natin si 1 dun sa kabila. Sine A equals 1. Ngayon naman, kagaya ng ginawa natin dito sa kabila, we need to think of an angle that once we substitute to your A, which is an angle, I should say, will give sine a value of 1. So, ano ba yung mga functions o mga angle sa mabibigay kay A, kay sine ng 1? So, alam natin, kung babalikan niyo po yung mga nakaraang lessons niyo sa special angles, si sine ay magkakaroon ng value ni 1 kapag si A ay naging 90 or pi over 2. Alam natin na ang 90 degrees or pi over 2 is a quadrantal angle. Pag sinabi natin quadrantal angles, these are angles na nasa pagitan ng dalawang, siya yung nagde-divide nung, kumbaga sa nagsisilbing division ng dalawang quadrants. So, between quadrant 1 and quadrant 4, merong quadrantal doon, that 0 tsaka 360. Tapos doon naman sa y-axis, we have so between quadrant 2 and then quadrant 1, we have 90 degrees. Basta sinabi natin quadrantal angles, lumapat sa mga coordinate axes. So, ang sine 90, that is equal to 1. Dutin natin ha, aside from the special angles, kasama din po dun sa range na ito yung mga quadrantal angles. Hindi natin sila pwedeng kalimutan. Kung sinabi natin quadrantal angle, sa terminal side is naglay sa mga coordinate axis. And one particular angle that will give you, one particular quadrantal angle that will give you a value of 1 for sine 9, for sine is one particular angle that will give you a value of 1 for sine is 90 degrees or pi over 2. Okay? Ngayon, kung ating titignan ang value ng A natin that will satisfy this particular equation is pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, and pi over 2. Ibig sabihin, for the first rotation, ito yung mga angles na makakasatisfy for this particular trigonometric equation with respect to the variable A. So, ito po yung mga values ni A for 0 to 360. Sir, bakit hindi na natin in-apply yung ginawa natin kanina na may K, yung kinuha natin yung coterminal? Take note, ang hinihingi lang sa number 2, solve for the solutions of this equation from 0 to 360 degrees or 0 to 2 pi interval. Ang instruction lang sa atin, hinahanap yung value ni A from 0 to 2 pi interval. Doon lang sa loob na yun. Hindi sinabi na solve for all the solutions. Okay? So, importante po na hahanapin nyo kung may binigay bang interval doon sa ating instruction. So, yan po yung sagot natin for number 2. Okay, so let's have example number 3. Okay, solve 2 cosine squared x, sine x minus sine x equals 0, where x should be greater than or equal to 0 but less than or equal to 2 pi. Ibig sabihin, yung angle na hinahanap natin that will satisfy this trigonometric equation should be within the bounds of 0 to 2 pi or 0 to 360 degrees. So, dun lang yung hinahanap. Sa loob lang ng angle na to, yung hinahanap nating value for x. Huwag nang lalagpas doon. Okay? So, balikan natin yung equation natin. So, 2 cosine squared x sine x minus sine x is equal to 0. So, una natin gagawin dyan, i-treat natin siya as a typical na algebraic equation. So, pag gano'n na ginawa natin, meron na tayong makita dito na common factor na sin x. Labas mo yon. Sin x, quantity 2 cosine squared x minus 1. Since nakakuha na tayong dalawang factors, pwede na natin iset ang bawat factors to 0. Kagaya ng ginawa natin kanina. So, sin x equals 0, and then 2 cosine squared x minus 1 is equal to 0. Now, unahin natin isolve yung unang factor, yung sin x is equal to 0. In this case, we need to think of the value of x, or an angle that once we relate it to sine, it will give you a value of 0. Tatandaan po pagka ang value ay 0, 1, negative 1, yung value ng function, automatic po yun, ang una nyo iisipin, quadrantal siya. Itin ko ha, pag yung function ay may value na 0, 1, tsaka negative 1, quadrantal po dapat ang isipin natin. Yun po yung shortcut doon. So we need to think of a quadrantal angle that once we substitute to sine or we relate it to sine, it will give us a value of 0. So, unang-unang papasok sa isip natin dyan, kung titignan nyo po yung copy nyo ng quadrantal angles and special angles, kung hindi nyo kabisado, i-check nyo sa inyong table of values for quadrantal angles and then special angles. Una dyan, sine 0 degrees. That will give you a value of 0 for sine. Meron pang isa. Si sine pi or sine 180, 0 din siya dun. Okay? Pagka si sine ay nirelate natin kay 180, magiging 0 din siya. At yung pangatlo, sine 2 pi or sine 360 degrees. 0 din siya doon. Bakit? Once na nakaikot na yung angle, nakakompleto ng one complete rotation, babalik yan doon sa original pwesto niya na si 0 degrees. So, kaya sila pareho. Kaya 0 din si sine kay 2 pi or 360. So, yun yung tatlong angles na magbibigay kay sine ng value na 0. The next thing that we need to do is to solve for the value of x for this second factor. So, algebraically, lilipat natin yung 1 sa kabila. O, negative 1 nilipat dito, naging positive 1. Pero dahil hinahanap natin yung value ni x for this particular function, i-divide natin both sides kay 2. So, 2 cosine squared x divided by 2 equals 1 divided by 2. Next. Dito, kakancel natin yung 2. We have cosine squared x equals 1 half. However, we just want to have the value of x with respect to cosine. So, kailangan natin tanggalin yung squared value dyan. So, we will get the square root of both sides. Kukuhanin ng square root nito, kukuhanin ng square root niyan. Ang resulta niyan, ito. Cosine x is equal to positive negative 1 over square root of 2. So, alam natin na pag ni-rationalize natin ito, kasi nga may radical sign doon sa baba, this is also equal to positive negative square root of 2 over 2. Ni-rationalize natin ito. So, cosine x is equal to positive negative square root of 2 over 2. So, dalawa yung values na i-relate natin kay cosine x. We need to think of angles, specifically values for x, na angle yon, na pag sinubstitute natin kay cosine, will give us a value of positive square root of 2 and negative square root of 2 over 2. Ulitin ko ha, we need to think of the value of x that when we substitute to cosine, it will give us a value of positive square root of 2 over 2 and negative square root of 2 over 2. Let's start with square root of 2 over 2, positive square root of 2 over 2. Umisip tayo ng mga values ng x, mga angle yon most likely, na pagka sinubstitute natin kay cosine, nirelate natin kay cosine, magkakaroon tayo ng value na square root of 2 over 2. Sa special angles, unang-una na angle na pag nirelate natin kay cosine will give us a value of square root of 2 over 2 is cosine pi over 4 or cosine 45 degrees. Yun po yung una. Yan sa quadrant 1 yan. Pero may isa pang quadrant na kung saan positive din si cosine. And we know that that is quadrant 4. So, hanapin natin yung counterpart ni 45 degrees sa quadrant 4. And that is 315 degrees. Or in radian measure, that is 7 pi over 4. That's 180 divided by 445 times 7. That is 315. Square root of 2 over 2 din yun. So, si square root of 2 over 2, si cosine ay magkakaroon ng value na square root of 2 over 2 na positive kapag yung x natin ay naging pi over 4 or 45 degrees or naging 7 pi over 4 or 315 degrees. This time, hanapin naman natin yung values ni x na magbibigay kay cosine ng value na negative square root of 2 over 2. So, ibig sabihin, we need to think of two quadrants that will make our cosine negative. Si cosine ay negative lang sa quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. Sa quadrant 2, magiging negative square root of 2 over 2 si cosine kapag ang x ay naging 135 degrees or 3 pi over 4. That's 180 divided by 4, that's 45 times 3, that's 135. Negative square root of 2 over 2 po yun pag nirelate natin kay cosine. So, dahil hindi lang kay quadrant 2 negative si cosine, nasa quadrant 3 negative din siya. So, ano yung counterpart ni 45 sa quadrant 3? That is 225. Or basically, that is 5 pi over 4. So, cosine 5 pi over 4, 180 divided by 4, that's 45 times 5, that's 225 degrees. This angle will also give your cosine a negative square root of 2 over 2 values. So, in other words, ang mga values ng x that will satisfy our trigonometric equation from 0 degrees 2 pi interval, ibig sabihin sa unang rotation from 0 to 360 degrees, ang mga values ng x na makakasatisfy sa ating equation ay 0 degrees, pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, pi, 5 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4, and 2 pi. So, yan po yun. Okay, so let's proceed to our last example, which is example number 4. Solve 1 minus 2 sine squared x plus sine x equals 0, where your x should be greater than or equal to 0, but less than or equal to 2 pi. Meaning, yung values ng x, mga angles yon na hinahanap natin na makakasatisfy sa equation na ito should be in the interval 0 to 360 degrees. So, balikan natin yung equation natin kanina. So, 1 minus 2 sine squared x plus sine x equals 0. So, iayos natin yung equation natin. Iayos natin. Pag inayos natin yan, negative 2 sine squared x plus sine x plus 1. So, kamukha na siya ng quadratic equation. But this will be easier to solve if we can make this expression a positive one, or a positive expression. So, we can do that by multiplying both sides by negative 1. So, negative 1 multiplied to negative 2 sine squared x. Negative 1 will be multiplied to positive sine x. Negative 1 will be multiplied to positive 1. And negative 1 will be multiplied to 0. Ang resulta, 2 sine squared x minus sine x minus 1 equals 0. So, kamukha na siya ng quadratic equation. So, we all know that one way to solve for the solutions of quadratic equation is to do factoring. So, i-apply natin siya dito. So, pinactor natin yan. Yan po yung factors niya. Ang next natin ginagawa pagka-factoring ang ginagawa natin is to set each factors to 0. So, that will become 2 sine x plus 1 equals 0 and sine x minus 1 equals 0. Uunahin natin itong isolve. Okay? Step by step natin. Pag sinolve natin ito, lilipat natin si 1 sa kabila. So, that will become negative 1. But since we just would like to determine the value of x, we will divide both sides by 2. So, 2 sine x divided by 2 equals negative 1 divided by 2. Kakancel natin itong 2. We have sine x equals negative 1 half. So, just like what we did doon sa mga una natin pinag-usapan, we need to think of an angle or angles na kapag nirelate natin kay sine, it will give our sine a value of negative 1 half. So, the first thing that we need to do is we need to think of a quadrant na magbibigay kay sine ng negative value. Alam natin si sine ay positive lang sa quadrant 1 and then quadrant 2. So, it means in quadrant 3 and quadrant 4, sine is negative. So, what particular angle in quadrant 3 ang mabibigay kay sine ng value ng negative 1 half? Alam natin na yun ay 210 degrees. Or in radian measure, kasi naka-radian yung ating interval, that is sine 7 pi over 6. Or 180 divided by 6, that's 30, times 7, that's 210. Yun yung angle sa quadrant 3 na mabibigay kay sine ng value na negative 1 half. Pero si sine ay negative din sa quadrant 4. So what angle will give sine a value of negative 1 half in quadrant 4? That is 330 degrees. Or basically, that's sine 11 pi over 6. That's 180 divided by 6, that's 30, times 11, that's 330. So, nasolve natin yung unang factor. Let's move on to the second factor. Sine x minus 1 equals 0. So, we just transpose negative 1 on the right side. So, we have sine x equals 1. Ayan. Yan na naman tayo. So, pagka 1, negative 1, and 0 ang involved, automatically ang papasok sa isip natin, quadrantal. So, what particular quadrantal angle will give sine a value of positive 1? So, kung i-check natin, si sine from 0 to 360 degrees, in this interval from 0 to 360 degrees, or 0 to 2 pi, the angle that will give sine a value of positive 1 is 90 degrees. Or in radian measure, that is pi over 2. From 0 to 2 pi, wala nang ibang angle or quadrantal angle na mabibigay kay sine ng value na 1. So, na-solve na natin yung buong equation. Therefore, the values of x that will satisfy this equation from the interval 0 to pi or 0, 360 degrees is 7 pi over 6, 11 pi over 6, and pi over 2. So these are the angles that will satisfy our equation. So I hope you learned something in this particular topic, trigonometric equation. Again, good day everyone.